the general theme is the idea of inclusive education and digital technologies, and really about the idea of technologies creating spaces and removing barriers so that every child can access their classroom. It's not just the academic learning. Of course, that's really important. And there's lots of stuff around the science of learning and the science of reading that are really important there. I'm really interested in social inclusion. And that's what gets me out of bed in the morning, is the idea of how we can create inclusive social spaces, particularly around those unstructured lunch times, before school, after school, how kids can develop friendships within their schools. Because school, one purpose of school is definitely academic learning, because that's important. But I see the other and equally valid part is around that social development.
So important.
But also that you think back to your own schooling. What are those things you really remember? And it's the people, I think, for me anyway, those social interactions. And you maybe have a different answer to that. But I do. And I think that's the thing that really excited me, was those social connections. And so for me, it's really how I can use like gaming culture, for example, as a way of getting kids who are on those margins, who are at risk of being marginalized, or from historically marginalized populations, and make them feel like school is a place for them. And we see this with the epidemic of school can't, or, mental health, challenges leading to school attendance challenges. And I think the idea of making these social environments meaningful, that's really where my research is going now.
Yeah.
Jess and I and Dan Martinez, who's probably listening to this podcast, have written a book called Press B to Belong.
Yep.
It's about inclusive esports clubs, and not just for kids who are neurodivergent, but for a whole lot of look at that gender inclusion angle.
Yep.
We look at how you can support the First Nations Australians through esports programs, and really it's trying to learn about from these teachers running innovative programs from around Australia. And we've gone and spoken to them and said, what are you doing that's removing barriers for your kids from these groups? And how are you working with communities and leaders within those communities to be able to make school a place that's meaningful through your esports programs? And it's just trying to actually share some of these wonderful stories. So that's really exciting. That's sort of, I think, in terms of projects, one of the ones that I think is hopefully going to make a big difference.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, look, again, another thing I found out of being a neurodivergent is that you tend to always empathize by telling a story that relates to, and I'm the guy that will tell 3 or 4 of those stories. So excuse me, but the same thing for me. School was amazingly fun when it was fun, and it was grueling and punishing when it wasn't. And particularly on the social strains, I had bullying issues. That, again, when you're a kid with RSD, I was an only child, and I was someone that had also moved from one primary school to another area. So I was, no idea. And the bullying thing ruined probably 3 or 4 good years of my schooling until that guy left. And then all of a sudden I opened up to another level. Yeah. But again, even my parents were like, this kid's getting bullied. What are you doing? What are you doing to stop it? Oh, we separate them. Oh, yeah, cool. And what happens at lunchtime? Oh, well, we can't control everything every minute of the day. So yeah, that's just me sharing a story as to, I empathize with that 100%. It's so hard for kids that are a little bit different to have the same schooling experience as everyone else.
Yeah.
My dad's a teacher, and he said that sort of the kids that have, a visible difference, so a kid, that might be using a wheelchair, or a kid that has, an obvious physical difference, they tend to get a bit easier time. But kids know why they're different. They have an explanation. There's a reason. It's the kids like us that were different, but there was never really an explanation why. They get that sort of association with being
You're
a bit
just
weird,
a weirdo.
and you become targeted. Yeah, and I look back and it's like, I was so autistic, so autistic. But I, even back in high school, they would have, the kids the same age as me, they would have seen, that very stereotypical presentation of kids that had a lot higher support needs. And so for me, I was just a weird girl who was really into video games.
Yeah.
But it's so hard, because there's no explanation. They just have a really hard time. And, we work with so many teachers now as well who really want to support their neurodivergent students. They care so much. But a lot of these teachers have also done their initial teaching education 30, 40 years ago. And our understanding of neurodivergence has changed so much. So they're doing their best. They're doing everything they can within their power. But, how do you find and understand what we know now and all the differences in how neurodivergence presents in supporting autistic girls and supporting girls with ADHD, or, the boys who were just a bit, flighty or didn't pay attention or potentially had hearing loss, but, actually had ADHD, but they weren't getting out of their seats and disrupting class, so it was never picked up. So we're trying to support those teachers as well, because they just, it's not their fault. They're doing the best they can.
They've got a job to do, which is to teach, not to have to be a psychologist and observe everyone's mental standing.
But how do you support what you don't know when, especially I think the last 10 years, the understanding of neurodivergence has changed so much. So even someone that's been teaching for 20 years, unless they've actively had the opportunity to get that sort of education and professional development, and there's not a huge amount of it around too. And you do have to actively seek it out. So it's really about supporting those teachers who want to do the best thing they can.